So the end, when you were talking about like what are the stressors that turn you toward phone use and how do you feel about it, I think there's also something really interesting about how you feel when you're done using it. And I think before, when you were talking about food, it feels a lot like fast food. Chicken nuggets are great when you're eating them. 10 minutes later, you're like, what did I just do? So what's a productive way to have a conversation with a teenager when they're done using their phone and they start acting in a crabby way or in a way that is like just like antithetical to how they usually are, other than saying like, look at how you're acting? That is not helpful. Like, what are some productive ways to have them reflect on that behavior and like help them realize, yeah, I do act differently afterwards?
I think this is a spot for what researcher David Yeager would call collaborative troubleshooting, which is this process where you again just assume that like your teenager is like, you know, a smart colleague of yours who is agentive, who can self-reflect in interesting ways, and you just get really curious about asking. You only do questions, you don't do statements. And you could just ask something like, I'm just, you know, maybe not in the moment of maximal crabbiness, but you could say something like, you know, like, I've actually been thinking about my phone use, and I notice like when I'm on email too long, like I just feel like so gross, and I probably get crabby with you, and I'm sorry about that. I'm just curious, like, if there's, you know, like, can you relate to, I know your teens have different relationships with their phone. Can you relate to that at all, right? You're not accusing them. You're just getting really curious, right? They're talking like them, like you're an adult. And they're going to tell you stuff. And you might find out they don't notice at all that they get crabby after 3 hours on TikTok. But you might notice that they're like, yeah, I can feel that. But it's not after TikTok. That actually feels like I reduced my anxiety. That's great. It's actually after video games. Like you might learn something that wasn't what you were thinking. And then, so that's kind of what's often called kind of suggesting thought. And so you're kind of pulling the thought out. And then you kind of work with, the next sort of step in collaborative troubleshooting is to kind of highlight the parts that you're sort of proud of. You could be like, that's so cool that you actually noticed that. I'm actually really proud that you've noticed that. Because like a lot of adults don't even, like I know adults at work that don't notice that at all. And then you get to kind of this sort of troubleshooting part, which is like, you know, given that you feel that way, I'm curious what strategies you have. I'm sure you've thought of some, like, you know, you're a smart person, I'm sure you've thought of some, like, what are the types of things that you do that? And you're just allowing them to kind of troubleshoot and sort of making them connect the dots there. But that feels really different than like, you're so crabby after you. This idea of collaborative troubleshooting I love is this researcher, David Yeager, who talks about, you know, we often think of kids either as like, you know, their frontal lobes aren't done, so we have to just like tell them and like order them around or whatever. Or their frontal lobes aren't done, so we'll just like let them do what they're gonna do. Like it's too fragile to like, you know, they get too much stress. But we don't tend to think of them as like what we probably felt like when we were teenagers, which was like, we just want to be agentive. We just want to be treated with some respect and like we're adults. And if you remember what you thought as a teenager, you knew a lot of stuff that the adults didn't think you knew, right? And legitimately knew a lot of stuff that the adults didn't think you do. And collaborative troubleshooting like highlights that fact that like what they really want is respect. What they want is to kind of have your help, but in a way that makes them feel respected. And that's why it's such a powerful process. But I think curiosity, asking questions, allow your vulnerability. Like I know you've thought of this as something I think about all the time. Like what strategies have you come up with? And often you'll learn that they're actually more thoughtful than you expected, or the thing you were trying to intervene on isn't the thing that's the problem. It's like something else. Like it might be that like they only get crabby using TikTok because they're using that as a regulatory strategy because they were already crabby because they have too much homework. And then you can have a conversation about, okay, how do we navigate homework? It's not about TikTok anymore. So yeah, collaborative troubleshooting, big believer in it.